Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Roxanne Vargas. We welcome you and we thank you for joining us here for another important conversation on this Wednesday afternoon as we take a deeper dive into our community and issues that you all are discussing across all of our digital platforms. And of course, as you continue to watch our news on air and here online, we welcome your questions and your engagement as well as we take a deeper dive into a story that a lot of people have been talking about right here in our community for quite some time. We're taking a deeper dive into an issue recently that we have been reporting on, specifically with the Sunrise Police Department. And we're talking about police protocols. A lot of questions have come up with this body cam video in Willard Shepard's reporting that we brought to you just last week from the Sunrise Police Department. You might have seen it already. This video lots of you were clicking on it, over 550,000 views on the NBC6 YouTube page as just alone, not including on the Facebook page with over 3,000 views there. So let's show you the video that we're talking about. In this body cam video, you'll see Sunrise Police Sergeant Christopher Police, and his actions here is what's currently under fire. And there is an active investigation, internal investigation right now, where you see the sergeant put his hands on the throat of a fellow officer to de-escalate a situation. The body cam footage, it is shocking to watch, as you see here, and it is what we're talking about this afternoon. We're going to talk about the response from the Sunrise Police Chief, Anthony Rosa, as well, who released the video, not having to, in an effort to be more transparent with the community. Again, that officer police, he's been relieved of responsibilities at this moment and the subject of an internal affairs investigation following that incident. A lot of you were talking about it on our social media pages and among each other, and we're talking about it right here this afternoon on the NBC6 Facebook, YouTube channel as well. And again, we welcome your questions for our experts. I want to begin by welcoming my colleague and friend, NBC6 investigator Willard Shepard, who joins us live this afternoon. And Willard, you led this story. You brought it to us last week right here on air and online as well. Willard, I just want to ask you about your initial reaction when you first saw that body cam video that was released by the Sunrise Police Chief.
Well, first of all, Roxy, always great to see you and our viewers and people who follow us over on the air and now following us in this format as well as we do our very best here at NBC and Telemundo to provide this information to the community across the board in a wide variety of formats. To this point, this video from law enforcement experts I've talked to, known throughout the years, and even some community leaders, extremely high marks in two regards. Number one, in the fact that we are seeing this video at all. The Florida statute and the way the law is set up, and although it stops me and stops our colleagues here at NBC6 from doing our jobs to the best of our ability because we can't show you certain things, but the Florida statute under the 119 statute, that allows when an investigation is underway, a police and law enforcement investigation, as long as that is underway, all of this information does not have to be released. And that includes videos like these. So the first thing is that the police chief in Sunrise, Anthony Rosa, did not have to release this video. As long as this internal affairs investigation is underway, it's, quote, not what we call public record, that we can, of course, show you here on NBC6. That is the first thing, that we saw the video in the first place, that he made the decision that the public should know about this. They should see exactly what is going on. The second thing with this video is, and I want to put this in context, what was going on here before this? The Sunrise police officers were called to a small store. A man had been in the store and actually started fighting and beating multiple people at the store. So he was arrested for a violent felony. He was placed in the back of the police car. And at that point, he had already been handcuffed. There were some verbal exchanges, as you can imagine, when officers arrest someone. Most people are upset about being arrested. There were some things that were said back and forth. And the report indicates that this sergeant walked over, took out a can of pepper spray that he has in his belt, and approached the vehicle. At that juncture, a female officer who's only been on the force 2 years, and the sergeant that was on the scene, who's a 21-year veteran, she stepped up and actually grabbed him by the belt, the back of his belt, and started walking him away from the police vehicle where this now defendant was being held in the back of the car. That's when he turned around, and the video shows that he grabbed her by the throat and was pushing her back up against a police car. She's getting incredible marks, not only from her own police chief, but from law enforcement experts across South Florida, people that are in the legal community as well that I've spoken with about this, because she stepped up and in essence did the right thing. The things we've talked about and that Rodney's going to talk to you about here very shortly about there should have been good police work way before anybody knew who George Floyd was. I had someone say to me, hey, if this woman would have been in the Midwest on a day that George Floyd lost his life, he wouldn't have lost his life because she intervened. And that's why this has been so important to see that the kinds of things and police reforms that we've talked about actually happening in this particular case did make a difference. And it's something that the community should embrace. And when the time comes, I certainly want to sit and talk with this officer about her doing this because this would, in essence, Roxy, you and I going up to the president of NBC and saying, hey, man, we can't put that on television. Okay. She was outranked, seniority, leadership. And she said, no, that's not the right thing to do. And she actually did it. So kudos to her. And that's why this has been so important for people to actually see.
And she received the kudos from the Sunrise police chief as well. Let's go ahead and show that full screen. We're just showing you parts here of the statement here from Sunrise Police Chief Anthony Sosa, who said the actions of our officer involved in this incident are exemplary of the professionalism the personnel of the Sunrise Police Department regularly display while honorably serving the public in a profession that is all too often difficult and dangerous. Willard, as you said, there were two reactions here. There was the reaction that the veteran, that the sergeant had against the defendant who was in the police car. You could see in that video and in handcuffs. And you could even see the defendant kind of inch back when that sergeant came at him. That's the video that you're watching here. The moment that you're watching here on this body cam video is his reaction to that officer who had been in the service for 2 years. All right, and I just want to give some context. This is what I was just talking about, the image of the defendant in the handcuffs and in the police car. And while we're talking now about the police chief, let's go ahead and put up the full screen of the police chief's part of his statement in regards to the sergeant who is currently under investigation. Police Chief Rosa said, upon hearing about this incident, I immediately relieved the sergeant of his supervisory responsibilities and ordered an internal affairs investigation. Went on to say in part, quote, the sergeant has no contact or supervision over subordinate personnel. The investigation is active and ongoing. I assure the public that the investigation will be thorough and will be complete. Willard, we also have the Fraternal Order of Police also spoke out. You were giving us context right at the top here about the fact that the chief did not have to release this video here. And he said in an effort to be completely transparent with the community. But again, this is an ongoing investigation. So we want to show the community what the Fraternal Order of Police had to say as well in regards, pretty much saying that this officer is entitled to due process, right, Willard?
Yeah, that's right. Roxy, this is the kind of thing where there's always a balancing. There's a couple of things that are in play here. First of all, this officer has, as a member of the union there's specific union regulations and guidelines that the city of Sunrise and any jurisdiction here in South Florida has to follow when it comes to one of these union contracts. And that means that the officer has those basic employment rights that he just, can't be fired immediately, can't be kicked out of his job. He gets a hearing, he gets all of those types of things. Now, of course, outside of that, he also has his legal due process in court, where if he feels necessary to go outside of, generally there's arbitration in those types of contracts between city employees and their employer. That requires some mediation, requires some arbitration, but he also has general legal rights where he can go to court if they feel like they take certain actions against him that are unfair. Now, the reason I talked about this Florida law and the way it's set up and the confidentiality and that it can't be released, which is frustrating to us, but understandable under many conditions. And it simply says is, hey, look, before the it's over and that we know everything that happened, we don't want it influenced by someone who can find out something about it. It's the same thing that happens in court. If you're going to be a witness in a trial, you can't sit in the back row and watch 10 other witnesses come forward and testify and then go, okay, it's my turn. Here's what the story is I'm going to tell. No, you have to, you're not allowed in there. You can't see any of it. You're not supposed to watch any of it, all of that. So we're getting the raw, true data. The police union was basically upset because they said, you put this stuff out there. It didn't need to be put out there. It now makes it harder for him to be able to get a fair due process because people have kind of already made up their minds about him. People that may have seen this, when he goes out on the road again, if he does in the city of Sunrise, and they go, hey, that's the guy, that's the sergeant that grabbed the lady by the throat. So therefore, it can have an impact upon him and the police union doing its job, thinking unfairly toward his due process rights. But that's why these situations are so difficult, because the police chief also has to balance making sure that the public knows that the city's doing its job and they're not going to allow bad policing. And that's why we've seen this video released, but that's also why the union is coming forward saying, hey, look, it's not over yet, man. You know, you didn't have to waive your rights or the way the statute's set up. The chief didn't have to waive it and do it. But we're in a new day, Roxy, and that's a good thing that police departments want to be more transparent. And when they have the opportunity to do so, this is an example of them doing that.
And the question is, are we seeing a shift in policing, the old school, if you will, versus new school? How do you deflect? How do you handle a situation like that other police officer who had been on the force, has been on the force for 2 years? I want to bring in, as we continue the conversation, Mr. Rodney Jacobs, who also joins us live this afternoon for this conversation, Assistant Director of the City of Miami Civilian Investigative Panel, also known as CIP. Mr. Jacobs, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. We appreciate you joining the conversation. I know you've been listening as I've been chatting here with my colleague Willard, and we were just talking about transparency and due process. What is your take, sir? I mean, you oversee investigations, community relations, policing initiatives. So when you first saw this video and the fact that it was released by the chief, what was your take?
Yeah, I think Willard is spot on with his take as well, that not only do you want to preserve the officer's due process, but you also want to ensure that people are being held accountable for actions of misconduct. And really, this is something that we're seeing a little bit more here in the state of Florida. Officers do have a duty to intervene due to a new law here in the state of Florida that was passed during the last legislation, which encourages officers to intervene in situations where they think individuals will be harmed, as long as they don't at least mess up any police officer action that may harm them or the other officer. So officers do have a duty to intervene now more than ever before to avoid situations like George Floyd. And what I will extend, or what I will posit here, and we have a great example of this, is in cases that we have seen recently, is typically women officers who are intervening in situations like this to ensure that officer misconduct isn't happening. Almost 2 or 2.5 months ago, we actually wrote a letter closing out a case where a woman officer intervened. And something very uncharacteristic of our panel, we gave at least a written accommodation for that woman officer who stepped in during a very, very hostile situation. We felt as though without her being there, that it could have escalated into something more serious. We see maybe 2.5 years ago as well, during the George Floyd protests, Crystal Smith, who was a woman officer in Fort Lauderdale, and a picture was taken, a very visceral, moving, impactful picture of her pointing to riot male officers to go the opposite direction when it seems as though they were going to go into a protest and arrest and pepper spray people. So there is constant examples of female officers stepping up, intervening where misconduct may be laying, and ensuring that no one is tarnishing the badge they're wearing.
And again, Willard, as you said, I mean, not just, Willard said earlier, Rodney, this is a police officer who, as you pointed out, a female, but significantly less experienced compared to the sergeant here who is in question. 21 years of service versus 2 years of service. And when we watch that body cam video, you really don't see much hesitancy. You saw the sergeant kind of going after you. You assume with the exchange there were words because there is no audio here, and that's another question that I'm going to ask you, gentlemen, just a moment. But really, not much hesitancy there, as you see in that video. The other perspective in this video goes right in and just grabs she does immediately what she can, and that's a conversation about the importance of interpersonal skills when it comes to the training of our new up-and-coming police officers, the de-escalating of a situation. And that goes back to what I was saying about this new age of policing. You mentioned George Floyd, Rodney, and that certainly was a moment for this entire country, the world, to really stop and say, let's take a look at excessive force and what that looks like and how we can change and shift mindset and training so we don't see another case like this.
Yeah, really, it's really two things that we have to unpack here. And the first thing is police academy training. I wouldn't say it's a new way of thinking because this thinking has been out for probably the last 30 or 40 years or so. But having a customer service oriented policing academy is something that a lot of other departments are leaning into. It really questions the idea or the notions of, do we need a paramilitary organization, basic training style academy training? Probably not, because police officers typically are called for a lot of cases that are customer service oriented. When police are called, they show up because people are having a bad day and they need you to help work through their lives. We essentially don't necessarily need to train them in like wartime skills like a soldier would have.
Right.
So, the notion of customer service policing utilizes ideas of not only de-escalation, but also how to just talk through situations with your fellow officers. So a lot of training is questioning how we are training police officers really on the ground level in the beginning so that they are able to go through the ranks, be promoted, and have that culture to be a part and ingrained of their everyday lives. The second part of what you're saying is that, some officers do need to be retrained or, be more up to date with the new trends and best practices that are coming out with policing. But something that I always say and that we're a big proponent of in our office, that we don't want to send officers to charm school, right? There's certain things that just as a human being innately, you should know that you should not be doing. I'm not going to send an officer to get more training if they're cussing out grandma, telling her things that you probably wouldn't tell your own mother. And I think maybe this is one of those cases as well. Although, it's still early and investigations ongoing, and I believe officers do deserve their due process. But under no circumstance, unless there's a clear and present danger, should I choke out one of my employees or put my arms around their neck that way. I don't know what level of training would train them out of that kind of behavior. But I'm not a proponent of sending officers to something that may look like a training to do things they should know not to do.
I want to bring up also the question about anger. We had one of those questions from our viewers that was posted because you just mentioned that part there where you shouldn't be putting your hands on a colleague unless, as you said, there's clear and present danger. So let's bring up one of the comments here from one of our viewers who was specifically talking about anger. And Susie writes, quote, "I'm curious to hear what he was saying to her. All unacceptable," she says. "Definitely an anger issue and should be investigated." That's from Susie Perez Losada, one of our viewers there who commented on our Facebook page.
Yeah, I think I personally don't necessarily need to know what was said. I'd imagine whatever was said wouldn't really take away the level of culpability you can see in their actions. But I think usually, obviously, with body worn camera, there isn't any mute function unless the officer decides to mute their camera because of something that will infringe on their investigation that's ongoing at that moment, or it's in some sort of like protected area of the recording. Usually that's in the first 15 seconds of the recording. So although the audio would, give us more context to the situation, I don't really think it would add anything additionally to some of the things that we're seeing here on the film.
Willard, what about? I want to ask you about that because one of our viewers also asked the same question. They were mentioning, they'd be curious to hear what was being said. The fact that the audio was stripped there from the body cam video rather.
Okay, well, the first thing about this is, and obviously I wasn't inside the room with the city attorney from the city of Sunrise when this initially happened with the police chief, but they're doing what they can, as we saw there, to try to protect the identity of this female officer. They want to make sure that at this juncture, nobody knows who she is. I presume that, her name was used along in there, that there were other things that were taking place there that they needed to protect the investigation, but primarily for that, to do that. In the larger picture, in terms of the anger management and those types of things that you talked about, and cutting through the chase, Rodney and I are both military people. And so we always think and know that, hey, look, the responsibility of having a set of weapons, no matter what those are, in your hand as military officers or as a police officer is a huge responsibility. And we want those people to have the ability to go through all steps possible to de-escalate a situation, to not use force, especially lethal force. Those are the people who you want carrying badges and captain in the Army Reserve and guard like Rodney is now. And to be able to, in those situations, if that person with that makeup and that mentality and that training and that attitude, if they ultimately use force, we got no other choice. And that's the confidence that we should have in all of our police officers about this. So when you see this type of thing happen, obviously, when I looked at it, and other police officers have looked at it, and Rodney looked at it, if this person did this to another officer, your question is, and there was a case that Catherine Fernandez-Rundle is prosecuting in the city of Opelika, where an officer 2 weeks ago was charged with battery because he shot another police officer with a taser. Yep. So clearly, in these types of things, when you talk about an officer doing this to another officer, the question is by the community, well, what the heck are they going to do to somebody that's not a police officer? And that's where this question that this lady posed about anger issues, why there's a huge concern, and should be, within the law enforcement community and our community in general, about a person who has the ability to take away a person's liberty and life. We don't think about that a lot. Rodney does in his job because he sees people who have the courage to come forward and make a complaint about a police officer. But a police officer, 99.9% of them are heroes and do the right thing. But when you think about it, you can take away somebody's liberty and life. And that's a huge responsibility. And the people who are doing that have to be completely vetted. And that includes a psychological makeup to make sure that they are able to only use excessive force where there's no other choice. And I'm saying that as a community member here in South Florida, and something that community leaders, people who live in certain specific neighborhoods who have a fear of the police, and people who are doing a great job in terms of handling their responsibilities, like Rodney, when an individual in the city of Miami comes forward and says, hey, I think I was wronged by a police officer. It's great we have this venue for Rodney and his team to attempt to hold people accountable.
Yeah, and that in that video, we saw the reaction of the sergeant to the defendant who was in handcuffs. His reaction to the police officer who tried to stop, and then of course her reaction to what she saw unfolding, and the fact that she has been applauded by law enforcement experts, by colleagues, by the Sunrise police chief, because she made the right call. And it's important that the community knows that that they're checking each other, right? Because Willard, as you said at the very beginning of this conversation, that the person who was put in handcuffs was in a store and was assaulting other people. There was a heated exchange back and forth. So, our police officers, they go through training, they are vetted, but they are in hot situations constantly. We see it all the time when we cover these stories. So checking each other. So why, gentlemen, why was it important? Why does this make a difference in sharing this video, even though there is an ongoing internal affairs investigation, and sharing this video to bridge that gap? What does this mean to the community?
Yeah, I think it's super important that any opportunity obviously is an opportunity to do good, even in the midst of bad situations. And right now, the community has a lot of distrust in its own police force. So any opportunity that arises where you can help bolster that trust, I think the police department should definitely lean into it. And this is one such situation. I always say that we're kind of all in this together. We're all on the same team. So it should not be hard to point out police misconduct when we see it, because if you're a police officer or if you're a police chief, you should want police misconduct to end just as much as I do. Because at the end of the day, I'm sure when police chiefs and sheriffs go to bed at night, they don't want to get that call that there was a police involved shooting or an officer that lost their cool. So it's really incumbent upon all of us to get on the same page and to find bad apples before they commit bad actions. Because understanding that is a proactive approach, well, we can kind of lean into it to stop these issues before they happen. That is probably one of the only few ways to build community trust, is to be open, to be transparent when you have bad information, to get out ahead of it, to explain it to the community, and to give them a level of confidence to ensure that it won't happen again going forward. But I think in times where where police departments aren't being transparent about the information, aren't releasing it, it gives them the feeling that they're hiding something. And that feeling doesn't really promote trust. It promotes resentment, hatred in some situations. So I think it's really incumbent upon police departments, and we're seeing it a little bit more now. And obviously, the team in Sunrise decided to take this approach where they're leading out and saying, hey, this isn't acceptable. It will not be tolerated. We're going to investigate it, but we're going to ensure it doesn't happen again. And it starts with that level of transparency. And then after that, accountability.
Hey, Roxy, I want to add on what Rodney has laid the foundation of there. This is so important. And I want people to also understand that police officers, they want to make sure that they don't have anybody stepping out of line amongst their ranks. In my line of military service, hey man, we go over the border, man, and they give us bad intel, and that's the wrong building we're gonna drop a bomb on. No, man, you're not gonna drop a bomb on that building. We're gonna turn around and go back. In Rodney's world now, his soldiers end up capturing some people that were shooting at them. Hey man, it's not, hey, they're shooting at us. But he's gonna make sure that their Geneva rights are followed and they're treated fairly and receive humane treatment. The people that step out of line, whether it's in the military service or in police service like this, police officers want to do all they can to make sure that officers who step out of line are held accountable, because it makes their job more difficult for all of them. It's just like anything else. If somebody writes something that's untrue and a journalist did something, Roxy, you've been in the street with us, what do they call? Yeah, well, it's fake news.
Yep.
So therefore, they have that duty as well. And I think that law enforcement, especially in this particular case, has come forward and said they're so glad that they have seen this action that this woman took and what the police chief and the city of Sunrise chose to do in this particular situation. And it can be an example for other cities to actually follow and do the right thing. And I think it also shows somewhat, I'll just call it what it is, a breakdown of what we've been seeing. It's the blue wall. Well, no, that didn't happen here. I mean, I can't tell you. I really can't tell you. And I don't know, Rodney, if you can emphasize more than I can. That lady, to basically tell the person who way outranks her and all of that and go, hey, man, we're not going to tolerate this. What the heck are you doing? That's basically what's happened here. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a huge step to show a change in culture, because if you look backwards historically, oh no, now she's the one in trouble. Nobody wants to ride with her. Mm-hmm. Is she going to go through a door and they not protect her on the other side? Mm-hmm. That's big.
Yeah, I think it comes down to no one wants to work with a liability. And I think right now what we're seeing is that individuals that are liabilities that will put you in a situation where it may not only cost you your job, but potentially land you in jail. It's just not being tolerated. And, Willard, you alluded to it as well. In military service, there's definitely a different philosophy that if we have a bad apple in our platoons or in our companies, you're not deploying with us because we're going to go downrange and something bad is going to happen. And now we're getting court-martialed, right? So no one wants that liability. And I often talk to, city managers and police chiefs, and I tell them any resemblance of a strong, resilient, sustainable city has a police department that has low settlements and they have low liabilities. So in order to have a strong city, you need a police department that's encouraging policing that has the community at its forefront.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about they have the most dangerous jobs, not only protecting the community and keeping the community safe, but keeping each other safe. When you're talking about, you said the other side of the wall, Willard. I mean, you painted a picture in saying that. So, that really hits home. Gentlemen, there's a comment that we have here from one of our viewers about education requirements of police officers. It's from Bob Tracy, who just wrote, quote, "As long as the U.S. continues to allow the minimum standards be a high school graduate or equivalent, unlike most other countries of the world where a 4-year degree is a basic minimum, we will have these issues." That's a comment from one of our viewers watching this live stream right now, Bob Tracy. Your response?
Well, I got to say that the police departments here do a very good job, the best that they can, of vetting people. But I got a saying, and I think, Rodney's heard me probably say this. Hey, look, character matters, okay? And you have a person with all the education in the world. They can have the degrees from the best universities. They can have the best training in the world, okay? But character matters. And I always say, hey, look, you don't find out what's inside you till you get squeezed. And at that moment, when those situations arrive, it's not education. It's not all of the things that we can put on a resume about a person. It's about who that person was, who their parents raised, the way you're raising your kids, Roxy, who they are at that moment. When that moment arrives, do they rise to that occasion, or are they to succumb to the worst in our community? And so at the end of the day, while it's great to have the most qualified people and all of that, when those kinds of moments come up, I can guarantee you that officer didn't think about what was on her resume that day, where she went to high school, all of those other kinds of things. She did the right thing because that was the right thing to do. And it says who she is. And as long as those people carry a badge, then our communities are going to always be better.
It's the character, it's the instinct, because had that officer not stepped in and done what she did, we might be having a very different conversation right now, because from what we see in the video, we can't hear, but from what we see, it was obviously a very heated moment. And had she not stepped in, her character and her instinct taking over to de-escalate a tense situation, our conversation this afternoon might be very different, gentlemen. Adonis, one of our viewers, Willard, he wrote, "So true," agreeing with what you had to say there. Gentlemen, we're going to be wrapping it up here pretty soon, but I want to go back to the final take for the community. And Willard, obviously, this is an ongoing investigation. This sergeant, again, currently suspended as that internal affairs investigation continues. But final thoughts, gentlemen, on where we are right now, the current state of policing in our community, again, all the different actions taken in this specific case, and what the community should walk away with.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start.
Yep.
I think we're having a moment, right? And I often talk about this in areas where civilian oversight is needed. Typically, when change happens for institutional organizations like policing, you need a moment to really spark people's interest to say, we need something else. We need something different. And I've been a proponent of what that difference looks like involves everyone to have a seat at the table so we can have those discussions. I like to think that civilian oversight, the work that we do, serves as a vehicle to take us from A to be, because not only do we understand policing from a different perspective, but we also have the data points to say this works and this does not. So right now, I think in America, we're looking at policing to say, hey, that doesn't look like safety. I think Willard and Roxy, if I were to pitch you both in a room and I said, unprompted, what is safety to you? I'm sure you guys would say, hey, maybe, my dog looking me in my face, or putting my baby to bed at night, or just making sure I have food on my table. You'll probably go over a list of things before you say, oh yeah, and the ability to call 911, right?
Hmm.
So safety in America looks fundamentally different than policing in America. And right now we're asking ourselves those pivotal and counterintuitive questions to determine what safety looks like in our community, but also to lead with a lens of public health. There's so much in our policing right now that doesn't have healthcare in it. And really bad policing, and even good policing, is a matter of good health. Good health for our cities, good health for our officers, good health for the individuals that they are policing with. So until we ask ourselves, until we really put reform efforts in place that champion public health, that champion safety, we really will just keep spinning ourselves in this circle over and over again. But I think right now we have a moment to do that introspection, and to ensure that we make the necessary changes so that bit by bit, we reform our police departments so that it ensures that it keeps working for the communities of which they serve.
Yeah.
Said
And
well.
Roxy, we need to also expand this. We've had our conversation about the policing element of this, but really in the larger regard, hey, when people have contact with the police, generally something's gone wrong already, something's bad already. And that our communities and our jurisdictions, when we talk about funding education, when we talk about funding healthcare, when we talk about funding housing, all of those kinds of things, the police are generally called the people who have incidents that ultimately are the end result of the lack of one of those other types of things. That's how they have contact with the police in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, this needs to also always be a wider discussion about what can we do so that drug rehab, proper health care, proper job placement, all those kinds of things. You rarely have a person that has those elements to their life that has any contact with the police department. And that's in the bigger regard what we can do as a community in South Florida to make sure that people don't need the police in the first place.
Yeah.
And therefore, when we do need the police, then it's much more limited in scope. And when there is a police officer that is awry, it can be highlighted much more quickly and the action taken necessary so that the community is protected.
Yeah. If I could get a quick alibi to what Willard is saying, I often say as well that everything starts and ends with policing in America, and it's just the way that we have been developed as a Western civilization with our own military-industrial complexes. But what Willard is really saying too is what we call in the public health field social detriments of health. And what this points to is that different things that erode our health, whether it's poor housing, whether it's poor food quality, and because of those things, they add different stressors on us. And those stressors potentially lead us to different lives. And those lives involve, sadly, the police force at times. But typically, when you talk to members of executive level policing, they'll tell you that we cannot police away all of our problems. It may not be necessary for police to go to every call to service, although that's what we do because police are the most well-funded entities in our government. So usually, if you get the most money, you get the most calls to service. But we really have to ask ourselves, is that necessary to combat social detriments to health? And is this really giving us the goals that we're looking to achieve?
Yeah, it's a cry really coming from the core of the community, and meeting the community there, and being there. And that, Willard and Rodney, that is a conversation that certainly continues. Obviously, our local and our state officials, try to figure out putting the pieces of that puzzle together. There is law and order, but there is also heart, and there is character, and there is true passion in enforcing those rules, but in seeing each other and being there for each other. And then you throw in a pandemic, right? The uncertainty of this pandemic. Here we are 2 years into it, still so many unanswered questions, and you have parts of our community that are, haven't really been able to get access in some cases to vaccines or N95 masks. We've been talking about that, and constantly trying to meet that need. Our local and state officials trying to get there, and that's just from that health aspect. But this is an important conversation, gentlemen, and one that certainly continues. Again, any final thoughts before we wrap this up? I mean,
I have one final thought for you, Roxy, and I haven't
always Willard,
because we've been dealing with this. I bet you, in terms of the larger perspective of what we're telling you, that man that was in the back seat of the car, that's the defendant in this, I bet you if we went back and looked at his life, we're going to find shortcomings in a whole list of areas that we addressed as to why the police say he was beating people up at the store in the first place. And none of this would have happened had they not been called to the scene because of that.
Willard, I do work with forever families and children who are in the foster care system. That's just in the conversations that I've had with these kids who, at no fault of their own, have fallen through the cracks of broken homes of the system. They're going from foster care home to group home with their belongings in a bag. And I say all the time when I speak with local leaders or celebrities who come into town, or state officials, local officials, I say all the time, when young kids, when you go back to the roots and to the basics of their upbringing, when they turn to someone, whom they turn to makes all the difference in the courage, in the character, and in the makeup and in the build of that person. If they turn to the wrong person, that's when you start to see the poor choices that are made. It's not bad people, it's just poor choices out of a lack of turning to the right person, because the right person just wasn't there. So in meeting with these children, as I have on a personal basis, just looking at me and saying, I see you, and telling that person that you are important, that child, you are important, you are loved. But then they're still going from group home to group home at no fault of their own. What is the future for a child like that? So as you said, Willard, you go back and you look at the past and you wonder what was the foundation of that defendant that was on the back of that police car. Why was he acting out violently in that store against other people at no fault of their own? Getting back to the root and to the basis, and to the heart of the community.
I'll add this as my last word, and it's a culmination of what you both said. We just need to care a little bit more here in America, just a little bit more, for not only for ourselves, but for our neighbors. There's such a lack of empathy right now in our current communication and in what we see, that if we just poured into each other a little bit more, it would make the difference. If we just cared a little bit more about, the broken street sign, or the road that wasn't on my block, or that maybe is in Willard's community, or the schools in your community. If we had that collective virtue towards one another, I think things would really be better. There was a time in policing that if a police officer saw kids on the street and they knew their parents, they would take them home in their police cruiser, not downtown, and tell their parents, because they were just ingrained within that community to know that you shouldn't be outside this time of night. And I know your parents, so I'm gonna take you to your house and let your parents deal with you. So there's so many stories like that from times past. And I think if we cared a little bit more, and we were empathetic that much more, and just surrounded our actions in a little bit more love. And I don't want to sound too altruistic, but if we think we did that a little bit more, it would make the difference.
Rodney, it's like I tell my boys, kindness is key, right? Kindness is the foundation. And we all understand the word kind, right? If you're being kind, you're going to get a good resolution, a good solution out of it. If you're not being kind, things don't end up the way that you hope. So I'm with you. Kindness is key, and checking on each other and looking on each other. Gentlemen, I so appreciate this conversation, both of your time and your expertise. I thank you both so much. Rodney Jacobs, Assistant Director with City of Miami Civilian Investigative Panel, known as CIP. Thanks for your time, your expertise, and everything you do for your community. NBC6 investigator Willard Shepard, colleague and friend, and thank you so much for lending your expertise and your insight this afternoon as well. And gentlemen, I'll thank you both for your service to this country as well. And certainly, thank you for your time. An important conversation that continues here on NBC6.
Rodney, good to see you.
Good to see you guys too. Take care.
All right,
care.
guys, thank you so much. And of course, want to thank all of our viewers here watching on air. For watching us on air, right, on NBC6. But in this case, thank you for watching us here across our digital platforms on the NBC6 Facebook and YouTube channel. We invite you to continue the conversation, comment below. We'll try to do our best to get to those answers as well. But we are always looking for answers here and trying to get them to you around the clock, keeping our community safe, engaged, and informed. I'm Roxanne Vargas. Thanks for your time this afternoon. Take care of each other.